thank you for that. That was really
Now, can you talk so that there's good...
Okay, yes, I just want to thank you. That was really convicting, but I'm really struggling. I'm angry. No,
And me? Oh,
no. No. You know, you're not saying it's not okay to ever be angry, right? I mean, it seems like we're all human. We get angry.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting we never display the emotion of anger to our, like, I know we're in my mind, we're supposed to help coach our children in you know, their emotions. They get angry, and we're supposed to help, you know. And you know what I tell my kids is, you know, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hit your brother, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and the same with us, you know, is it okay to say sometimes, you know, that really made me angry. You know, God got angry at injustice, you know, and I feel like, you know, when I see one of them hurting the other, that's injustice, you know, on a small scale, but it's still injustice, and it makes me angry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so are we never supposed to, like, tell our kids, you know, that makes me really angry
Mm-hmm.
when you hurt your brother?
Mm-hmm.
You know, not that we should, like, lose control and fly off the handle and start screaming,
Mm-hmm.
but is it okay to just tell our children, you know what, I'm really angry, I need to calm down and walk away, I'm going to give myself a timeout because I'm angry, and I need to go pray and ask God to help me, whatever, I don't know. Like,
There's so much inside of what you're saying, so much, and it's all beautiful, and things very practically to address. Let me try and just peel it open a little bit. And so start with one thing. When you say to a child, it makes me really angry when you do that. That's an honest statement. You are thinking angry thoughts and therefore feeling angry. So you're being honest. That's a good thing, right? I'm thinking that probably is not the highest and the best way to define the circumstance for the child. Because a child is looking, they're in a circumstance, they've made a choice. Think about it this way. And they punch their brother or their, you know, whatever. Okay? I use that word a lot, whatever. I need to stop. So they punched their brother. And then the defining climactic interpretation of that circumstance is, you have made me angry. See where I'm going with this?
yeah.
Is that the big deal about that issue? I mean, are you the big kahuna and your feelings are the things that really matter here? I go, somehow that disorients a child. It pulls their attention to something like, oh, so the whole thing is about whether I make you angry or not. And you go, that's not a big deal, right? On a scale from 1 to 10, the big deal is lack of fruit of the Spirit, no self-control, right? Character flaw, selfish, child, not caring about the other, unsympathetic, inability to empathize with another person, do unto me as you would have me, you know, do unto others as you have them do unto me. And there's all these big, beautiful spiritual lessons that one, you know, flawed event could be interpreted by you as a parent to help them grow in character. But we distill it all down to, you have made me very angry about what you've done. So you see what I'm saying? It's not wrong, it's just unfruitful. It's unprofitable to interpret the whole circumstance and distill it down to, the key issue here is, don't mess with my anger. So it just doesn't serve well the child. So I would just stay away from that completely. I would never say to a child, watch out, you're making me angry.
Oh, no, I don't.
Or you know, you made me angry, you know, by doing that. That makes me angry when you do that. So what? That's your problem. You deal with your anger. Now help the child deal with the big issue of what's the character flaw? You know, what's the character trait we're trying to build, right? Now, to go back to this, yes, we absolutely all feel anger. We feel anger. That's why it does say, be angry. You know, you cannot not be angry, so you kind of go, dumb remark, be angry. Oh, thanks. How can I not be, you know, not be angry? So, but it's just gently trying to say, okay, you cannot not ever be angry, but don't ever sin in the anger. Well, what is the sin in the anger? The sin is allowing the anger to make you less of a parent so that you're thinking on a scale that doesn't give you the release into the high level of doing the very best to disciple your child. It keeps you down at this human emotional swarmy swamp thing, right? That shuts down your ability to think big philosophy, big where am I going? So one of the things we're going to do right after the break is I'm going to have you sit down in groups, two couples together, and I'm going to have you think through, just stream of consciousness for about 5 minutes, what are all the character traits that are needed for an individual to have a deep and intimate and abiding, powerful walk with God. What character traits? What has to be in the person, right, to have that? What character traits make a really excellent husband or wife? What character traits make for an excellent employer or employee, right? And father and mother. So there'll be 4, you break down into groups. And so just make a stream of consciousness. What character traits need to be there? The patience, the flexibility, the forgiveness, the ability to forgive, all those things are going to go on there. Servant leadership, whatever comes into your mind. It won't be an exhaustive list, but it'll get us started. So if we get out of that, if we don't honor our privilege, our right, really, to have anger, then we can get into this, we can just climb the stairs, get into a new suite at a higher level, right? And begin to think through things about what's going on in that little child that gave him the motivation and allowed him the freedom to punch his brother. Is it habit patterns that are just wrong? Is it that he doesn't know how to handle his boredom? Does he not know how to handle his anger? I mean, he could very well just turn to that little kid his brother that he hit and said, "You just make me angry," and that's why I slugged you. There, all justified, right? So the whole thing just takes us all down. So yes, we feel anger. Don't sin, and don't model it for your children. They're going to feel angry, but I can tell you they'll struggle with anger a lot more if you model anger for them. If they encounter anger a lot, they're going to express anger a lot. Do you want to raise children who feel like, good question, good comment, like, I can never be angry, I should feel guilty, I should hide how I feel? Absolutely not. But our job, if what I've said to you is true today, our job with our children is to say, what are you thinking about right now? You're so angry. Tell me your thoughts. So beautiful, honoring, respectful, if they can. A lot of times, I don't know, right? So now's not the time to think about it. But later, some very neutral time, a day later, tuck him into bed at night. When you're so angry, I was wondering if you were thinking something like this. Because sometimes when I choose to be angry, and I would use that word with children, when I choose to be angry, through that's communicating, anger didn't just come out like a boogeyman. Gotcha! Totally under control! The robot kind of thing. No, I'm telling them in my own little subtle way. When I choose to be angry, sometimes when I choose to be angry, I'm thinking about that. I was wondering if you were thinking about that. Because if you were, what would be a better thought that maybe would make that anger, you wouldn't want to choose anger. If you were thinking this, I bet you wouldn't want to choose anger. See? Now you're in a whole nother realm. You're out of normative cultural parenting where everybody lives down here, and you're in to parenting in the flow of the Father Heart of God. So much bigger and so much more beautiful. And it doesn't deny any reality. It doesn't, tell people to stuff things. It's just saying, when we bring it out, let's bring it out at this high level where it's actually going to be drawing our children up into maturity and wisdom and out of the self-defeating patterns and habits that most of us live in. even still as adults, right? So I know that didn't hit all of those things, but some framework, and then we can talk more. I'd love to. Or
Okay. I have another question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'll try not to dominate this, but so I think a lot of times I find myself getting angry when I don't know what else to do.
Yep.
And so I think if we learn some practical tools, then and just taking this other course that I'm taking, this Positive Parenting Solutions, and she has some really practical tools, and I feel like if I have more of those tools to grab from, then I won't feel, because part of the reason we feel angry is because we feel, I don't know what to do, I feel out of control, So I think
absolutely
that would help a lot.
Yeah, and that's what this series is all about. Is what tools do you have? Because if you come into a situation with your child and you have no tools in your toolbox, you're going to revert back to anger, or you're going to just hate your life, or you're going to and your kids lose their bearings. You got to know. Wisdom is knowing what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and then having the empowerment, knowing how to connect with God's empowerment to do it. You know what to do. You know how to do it. You know when to do it, right? And you have the power to do it. That's wisdom, right? So that's, and one of the main things I want you to go away with is this idea of wisdom thinks ahead, sees the future, and prepares for it. Pre-training. How can I train my child for success for what's going to happen in an hour from now, or 2 days from now, or at grandma's house, or in the grocery store, or in the bank, or whatever. I'm pre-training. I know how to train in the midst, and I know how to do the redo so that I am breaking the power of that habit, or the power of that occurrence, right? And having them end with a positive laying down of tracks in their brain, neurological. And we'll be talking about that for 5 more months we have together, right? All right, anybody else have something to add in here?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
How would you, when teaching, little children, how do you balance? Because I know you mentioned, when they're born in the image of God, of course, so that they have that, in a sense of righteousness. But how do you also teach the fact that they're, born sinners, that they're born, with a very marred kind of image, and so, because I don't necessarily think that every bad behavior is learned necessarily. It just comes out of the overflow of their sinful heart. So that sin is not just an external thing that happens, but it's just, coming from, in a sense, it's also part of their identity, and that's why they need, Christ. Like, do you kind of blend that in with, teaching, or how do you kind of approach, that?
Okay. So I am of the bent, and I'll just give you what I've got, my perspective, and you weigh it, with what you think. I am of the bent that children are born into the world with the potential for good and the potential for evil. They have the potential for both. The wonderful thing is that God birthed that child through you and your wife or your husband, who believe and know the redemption of God, who know how to pray the word over them, who know how to not become a stumbling block. Because remember, the Lord said, don't you hinder the little children from coming to me. That's that should just be over your whole identity as a parent. Don't hinder my child from coming to God, to Jesus. Because that implies that Jesus says, if you don't hinder them, they're coming. Right? So I am of the bent that says, treat your child like a believer from the first wah in the delivery room. Don't ever imply to them, you are a sinner and you need to, come to Jesus and all of that. I just go, no, you are coming to Jesus, because nothing I'm doing is ever going to hinder you. And Jesus said, let the little children, that means they're on their way. Don't hold them back. Don't get in their way. They're on their way to Christ if you don't hinder them. So it actually falls on me, the part of whether the potential for good or the potential for evil actually takes over, the lead out, right? So if you are thinking about that, then, you're just treating your child as a believer. And I'm seeing my children. I saw all of my children right from the beginning as loving God. We talked about love of God. We talked about how they loved God. I taught them how to love God more. I taught them how to hear the voice of God. I taught them how to, worship and be able to see God. When we talk about, there are recordings, I've talked about, raising up children strong in the faith, and so you'll have access to those. I don't know if we'll get to that content, specifically, maybe yes, maybe no, with us personally here together, but you'll have access to it. But, so there are ways just to say, make a straight way for the Lord to walk into their heart. That's why I talked about having that philosophy of being John the Baptist. That's your John the Baptist philosophy of parenting, which is, I go before, I make a straight way, I bring down the mountains, I bring up the valleys, I make the rough places smooth and the curvy places straight, so that God has a straight way to walk into the heart of that child, right? So, I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think so. Yeah, because I definitely believe that, children are sinners for sure. So I wouldn't hesitate to tell them that, because I believe it. It's certainly the truth. Are you saying you believe they're sinners, but you wouldn't necessarily teach them that, or you just kind of think that they're kind of like the neutral?
Yeah, I would, within Christian families. Now we're talking about Christian families here. We're not talking about pagan families with
right.
pagan children. So inside of Christian families, I never told my children, you were a sinner. You are a sinner. I told them that what they did was sinful.
Right.
It was sinful. We did use the word, it's right, it's wrong. Parents, but that's almost out of our culture now, right and wrong. It's relative. Could be right today and maybe wrong tomorrow. Well, I thought, yeah, try that with a child. That's really a great foundation, right? So I did talk about right and wrong. I talked about what was sin. And we read the scriptures. And they learned the hearts, the all beautiful stories of the Old Testament. And you're selectively leaving things out that are totally inappropriate for their age level, right? But they're getting the exposures to sinful hearts. You're letting the power of the gospel define for them, going, whoa, that was a terrible thing that person did. Where did that come from? Sin in the heart. And we all have sin in our heart until Jesus takes it away. Isn't it so wonderful that you know Jesus? Isn't it so wonderful that Jesus is yours? And where does Jesus live? He lives in your heart. Yes, he does, sweetheart. So each of my children in their older years had a time when they had their own righteous crisis that brought them into this, now I own it for own it for own it. Now it's not just who I have been. It is like, if everything fell away from me, I'm here and I've got the heart of a martyr. Jesus is mine, I live for him, I die for him. Each of them came to that personal place, but they came to it out of, he's mine, I'm his. And then God just gives you this epiphany of, yes, and now you hear, you are my son, and in you I am well pleased, right? Everybody has that experience. But I never told my children they were sinners. I said, you are made righteous in Christ.
It kind of reminds me, it made me think of this story. My sister's kid was interested in the Bible. They're like, almost 10. And they're like, that's great, we're so excited, starting John. And he was like, I don't want to start John. He skipped to Deuteronomy and started asking questions about why these people had multiple wives and and we're like, oh no. So I think that there are truths in the Bible that are just tougher at younger ages, I guess.
Right.
But that's kind of a comical one.
I know, it's so funny. That's why Charlotte Mason talks about my sort of mentor in many ways. She talks about just letting the power of the word reach the children's hearts. But she said, you're always, and she always emphasizes this, discretionary leaving out. The leaving out parts, like the incest part, like the stick through the brain under the blanket. Okay, leaving out for the 3-year-old. Right? All right, let's take a break, okay? And
Let's just pause.
Yes!
Is it us?
I'm so glad you guys like to laugh. All right,
I've
so
never had
just
any
for
words. You've prayed before.
Yeah.
anybody listening on the tape. So what you just got done doing is, as couples coming together, and you were just brainstorming for what characterizes a person who makes and has the potential for being able to have an intimate, wonderful, ongoing, powerful relationship with God. And then what characterizes a good husband or a good wife? Then what characterizes a good mother or a father? And then what characterizes a good employee or employer? So I want you just to kind of go around and read off the characteristics of these people. So how about with God?
So we started off listing, going back to the anger, someone who is slow to anger, someone who's patient, not just with children, but just in life. You're not like reactionary to everything. So in your, we mentioned, you're disciplined, and you're, going back to kind of, training of yourself type thing. So those were a couple characters, and they, obviously came up with more.
So fruits of the spirit, who's
Love,
loving,
yeah.
patient, kind.
Say nice and loud.
And someone who is forgiving,
Yeah.
just having an acceptance to sovereignty, at least God's sovereignty, there's a higher being or power there, who is in the Word. I guess that might go under like discipline and training. Knowing biblical truth. So, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so it just reminded me of a message from last week at our church, and it was in the context of in today's society, it's common for people to have a broad view of truth, of what is true. And the message kind of pointed to having a narrow view of truth and having kind of a firm grasp on biblical truths and not being compromising or not being wavering on, this could be true and that could be true, but having a narrow view of truth.
Obedience, winsomeness, so just like a delight and a joy for life and being, trusting, to trust.
Okay. All right. Good list, and I bet you guys could think of a whole bunch of other things that would come through if you had more time. Maybe humility, hunger for righteousness, teachable, all those kinds of things, right? You just go crazy with that list. So we're going to compile these lists. You're going to have the list of these character traits, but you're going to keep going on with them for a long time. You're just going to keep adding and adding and adding, because you'll find out, you go, oh my gosh, we thought those were the basic 10, but there's 150. They're really, really very useful. Okay, so next, let's hear some about what characterizes an excellent husband or wife.
So we started with talking about traits of Christ, the patience, forgiveness, humility, love, on and on and on. And then we tried to figure out, okay, what was, how to rephrase it in a practical way for a marriage. And one was, or a few of them were, being a good listener, working hard, being dedicated and committed to protecting the marriage, taking time with each other. Communication was a big one for us, and knowing and practicing each other's love languages, and trying to be intuitive with your spouse. And then the other one was basically like re-educating yourself with each other in the sense of, how we are at the first year of marriage is different than we are at 10 years of marriage and so forth. And you kind of have to relearn your spouse. So it's this ongoing education, relearning each other.
growing together.
Growing.
Yeah, growing up with each other. Okay.
We also talk about 1 Corinthians 13. That whole chapter
Uh-huh.
basically is like a list of characteristics that would be good for all of us to have.
The love is.
Patience.
Patient, kind, all that stuff.
Okay, how about for a mother and father?
That's right. So, for being what makes an excellent mother or father or parent, and one of the things that we put is modeling well for our kids. So they're always watching us. So what we want to instill into our kids, we should be. So including the fruits of the spirit, which we mentioned, such as patience, kindness, love for one another. One of the things we also put, I think you mentioned hard work, it's also grit to show that you're grit and passionate about something, but also persevere, do certain things. You want to add anything else?
Attuning to the heart of the child, not just making them do things, but kind of sometimes letting them know why, or sometimes using humor in it, so it's not like you have to do this, but sometimes the kid doesn't know why, but when we're happy, they kind of want to join in and participate. Listening and communicating, making sure we feel heard, respecting their personhood, sacrifice, selfishness. You mentioned orderliness, Sunny?
Yeah.
Oh,
Selflessness,
yeah.
right?
Selflessness.
Selflessness.
There's something
Yeah.
to do with this.
Yeah. A big one for us was flexibility. It's huge. But I've noticed that a lot of the things that at least I initially thought of were things that I either feel lacking in or which I'm like, man, patience. Like, yeah, like I need some of that. And, so just, yeah, pretty much everything they said. But flexibility and patience and just integrity was another big one for us. Living.
Define integrity for me.
Just living like it reminds me of your dad, but just doing the same thing you would do as if when no one's watching, as if if you were on stage for people, and just living the same life behind closed doors as you are to the rest of the world.
And I think the only other thing I was going to add is being on the same page between husband and wives, so that the kids won't try to go to daddy, or for example, if they want something and mommy for something else, maybe they might say yes or no. So that's at least a yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Having a solid marriage.
Okay, and how about for employer-employee?
So some things we have on the list includes being people-focused, investing in people, valuing people, caring about people, for employers to know their identity, and also for employees to know who they are, respecting people, having integrity, we put that integrity and also honesty, being punctual, someone who goes above and beyond, collaborative, proactive, respect authorities, being able to follow and lead, having open communications, willing to listen, having empathy, thoughtfulness, being able to plan while being realistic and reasonable, someone who's able to bring clarity and avoid confusion, building community, having vision and having a goal. Having a heart to learn and to grow, being flexible and creative.
Okay. All right. So, what I'd like you to do is to send me these lists, okay, so that I have them and I'll just compile them and, I don't know, somebody come up with an effective way to do that. What I want to do is, I want all those. And I want you to have all those as your starting list. So you're just going to tuck it away in a little place when we're going to be using them through the rest of the month and adding to them, okay? So,
Can I suggest?
yes, do suggest. Here's a
Is
suggestion.
everyone on the Google group?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just post it to a thread there.
Cool.
Your list for your parent.
Okay.
You want one giant list, or do you want them
Well, I want-
categorized as you
What do you
have
want
them with?
I want to do
Parents.
one giant list,
Oh.
yeah. But, so what we can do is everybody post them there and maybe you
file
can
from
copy them off or something.
Yeah, that would just be intake, and then we have access to it if we need
Okay,
it,
and
so
then
we
just
can organize it.
cut and paste and get your list, okay? Because you're gonna build on it. All right, so now we're gonna hold that, we are gonna use